Let's rock this joint.
All right, well, I figured we would start with kind of our West Wing origin stories, and
Why don't you introduce yourself to the nice people?
What's going, Tail?
Okay.
So my name is Elyse Echo. I'm 28. I'm from this area. So I grew up right on the other side of the Potomac River in Northern Virginia. Live about an hour south now, where I teach middle school English. Was introduced to the West Wing by my grandparents. I spent a summer with them, and the only DVDs that they had were the West Wing. And I was too cool for VHSs, so I was stuck with the West Wing. And I was young, so I didn't really understand it all, but I knew that I liked it because it was smart. The writing was great, and then got to episode 10 with Richard Schiff and In Excelsis Deo, and I was just, after that, I was hooked. And as kind of my own medical problems and my own disabilities, became more evident and more pronounced throughout my life, I just kind of kept going back to the West Wing and going, oh, these things that are, such a big deal to me now, were portrayed back then. So I just always keep going back to the show as I was kind of dealing with my own things, because the way that these disabilities were portrayed in the West Wing helped me a lot, and kind of coming to terms with all everything about me. I was diagnosed with autism as an adult. I have a whole long list of physical disabilities and health problems, mental illness, things. Lost my mom to suicide about 2 years ago, so these are all just very active, important parts of my life.
Over to me. I'm Kat. Hi. I'm an actor, a musician, a cosplayer, general pain in the ass. I was on the creative team that brought you this thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. What can I say except you're welcome. I was not remotely interested in the West Wing at all. I had family members and friends who watched it when it was on, and they loved it, and they would hard sell me all the time, and I'd go, I'm not interested, I'm not politically minded, and I don't care, I'm not interested in a show about the inner workings of the White House, meh. And then in 2003, when they told me I had MS, and they doubled their efforts to say, well, you really should watch this thing because the president, I really didn't want to watch the thing, because, for the same reason that hypochondriacs probably shouldn't watch House. The last thing I needed was to be watching fictional president guy having symptoms that I may or may not be having, and immediately my head's going to do a thing and I'm going to start having them. But that said, so I still didn't want to watch it, but just thinking about it sort of brought me some comfort, sort of made me feel better, being like, even the idea of a fictional president who's obviously, he's got it way worse and he's got way more stress than I do. And yes, I am enough of a dork that I double checked to see if he and I were on the same shots. We are not. We found my MS really early and I'm a lot better off than he is, so thank you. But it made me feel good to think that he could be functional, this kind of functional, and have his job. And okay, so cut to, I don't know, 5 years later when it's over and it's on, and Aaron Sorkin was writing, he was commissioned to write the screenplay for The Social Network. And he said, well, I better learn about Facebook then. And so he got a Facebook. And a friend, and it was just like a forum, and he would just talk to people. And a friend of mine pointed me towards it because I had always said that, given the opportunity, I would like to thank him for, even though I don't watch it, just the fact that it exists, and I think it educates people, and the like, probably makes more people than just me feel better. So I messaged him there and said, hi, I don't watch your show, and I have no intention of watching your show, but thank you for this. Thank you for this, and, because it probably makes other people besides me feel better. And he wrote back and he said, Kat, you knocked my socks off. Godspeed to you and your family. Cut to 10 months later, I wound up watching it with the DVDs by default also, because my brother, I work at a summer camp where I don't get TV reception in the cabin where I live, and my brother knew that, so he just left me with DVDs knowing that I wasn't going to have anything else to watch. It's how he got me to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer too. And I'm like, okay, fine, I'm watching this thing. And a few episodes in, I'm like, grudging. And I wrote back and I'm like, hi, Erin, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I'm that girl and okay. All right, I changed my mind, I'm watching it, and yeah, I'm enjoying it, okay, thanks, bye. And he's like, immediately, within 5 minutes, he comes back, Kat, great to hear from you, I'm so glad you're enjoying the episodes. Listen, the MS is introduced in this episode, and so I hope it doesn't upset you, and then 17 people is a thing, and I hope that doesn't upset you. Thank you, bro, that was super cool. And then, of course, we bonded over deep cut Gilbert and Sullivan nerdery. So long way around, that was my introduction to The West Wing. The West Wing, that's a whole other panel, but The West Wing and Breaking Bad were the two things that taught me that if the writing is that good, premise is irrelevant. If the writing is that good, I don't care what your show's about, because if the writing is that good, you're going to engage me anyway. I resisted Breaking Bad out of hand too, based on premise, and it's like one of my favorite things. Anyway, back to you.
So I'm thinking about disability representation. I'm a big advocate for disability studies and disability rights in the world, in America in general. So when I think about disability advocacy, I think there's a couple important tenets that people need to understand where we're coming from with this. So one of those things is the different models of disability. There's two main models in disability studies, the medical model and the social model. The medical model says that a disabled person, we need to fix that person. This person can't make it up those stairs, let's fix the person's legs that, maybe they're in wheelchairs, they can't get up the stairs. Let's cure that person so that the stairs aren't an obstacle anymore.
Yeah, we both had a good laugh, by the way, over the irony that they put us in this room for this panel, which is easily the least disability-friendly room in the joint.
There's an elevator, but it's still, it's a pain.
Just funny.
So the medical model says we need to cure the person, whereas the social model says, okay, that person is in a wheelchair and can't make it up those stairs. What can we change about this situation for the person? So that's where we get things like ramps. So medical model is, cure the person. Social model is more cure the world. That's not really cure the world, just kind of change the world to adapt for the person, as opposed to the person changing themselves to adapt to the world. And a lot of disability studies, especially people with disabilities themselves, agree with the social model. We say, we're not wrong. There's nothing wrong with us. Yes, we may have health problems. Yes, we may, research for a cure for MS, cure for cancer, but disabilities, intrinsic disabilities themselves are not automatically bad and need to be cured. One of the other big things with disability studies, and especially with autism, is the tenet of nothing about us without us, where when you talk about disability things, you need a disabled person talking about that.
I gotta jump in there, because let me just preface this by saying that I think the podcast is a great thing and I'm glad that it exists. That said, and I also know that when they got to that early on, they were just getting on their feet and they didn't have the really good guests and they didn't have, blah, 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 and they were figuring it out. That said, when they got to He Shall from time to time, and not only did they have absolutely nothing to say, they had nobody on who had anything to say, and they filled up the time goofing around and using Game of Thrones sound bites. I threw things. Oh my God, I temporarily broke up with the podcast, also because I had messaged them, and I was briefly Facebook friends with Joshua Molina. I don't know why. I don't know the man. But anyway, I messaged the podcast and him, and I was like, hi, if you can't get anyone better to talk about the thing, I've been on podcasts and I, am vaguely intelligent and I can come and help you talk about the thing if you don't have somebody better. If you have somebody better, hey, cool. And they ignored me and didn't have somebody at all, better or not. So that you get someone, and they fixed it a little bit when they did the Stackhouse filibuster.
Essentially just about to talk
and they
about
brought,
that. So that original Stackhouse filibuster podcast episode, I was very angry with. I actually re-listened to it this week, just to kind of get prepared for this. And Stackhouse filibuster, that podcast episode, was just all about the medical model. It was autism needs a cure. My Some of those people that kind of called into the podcast and left things. I lost my son. My son's life is not the same. I want my son back. Were a lot of those messages that people were talking about with autism. And as an autistic person, and I call myself autistic, I don't say that I'm a person with autism, so I'll be saying that. I personally, that's just how I identify, but I know person first language is important to other people. But Stackhouse Filibuster and that podcast was all about autism is bad, how can we get rid of it? How can we remove it from the person so that the person is left with just neurotypical, good, regular person? And I got really mad at that because I don't think that I need to be cured. Yeah.
I was gonna let you finish.
No,
your
go for it.
Thought. But yeah, I love that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. And I loved it before anything happened. Our daughter was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder.
How old are you, John?
3.5. And, she's beautiful and she's wonderful and she's awesome. And I love the beginning part of the episode where Stackhouse is talking about, getting money for research.
Mm-hmm.
No problem with that. Misdiagnosis, fine. There's all these issues with, especially the social economics and all of the stuff he's talking about, fine, valid. But then when I'm watching the episode, I hate the fact that Donna seems to figure out that his grandchild has autism because the grandchild's not in the picture.
Right.
So, are you hiding the child with autism?
Yeah. You're taking the voice of the person with autism in that episode completely out of the picture.
Well, you're not wrong, but we have no way of knowing, and it could be that the parents wanted to keep the child away.
Correct.
It could be that the child is one of those. Listen, my daughter is not autistic, but we did all the checking, and she's 13 now, and she's qualified. She's still qualified. She has a speech disability, and from that there came behaviors. So I had to deal with a lot of that. So her terrible twos were the terrible 2s and 3s and 4s, and if someone in my family was running for Congress, was running for whatever, it would be hard to have her in the shot for a while because the crowd would have freaked her out. So you can't know, and it may be that they were protecting. So I love that episode so much that I choose to give it the benefit of the doubt, even though everything you're saying is entirely valid.
Right. We're speculating, but I want to think of him as the grandfather that's I just want to get all the stuff for my, grandchild and all of the, the things that he or she, because we never really find out, the sex of the kid, or really anything about the kid. I just kind of wanted more. I guess, looking at it now, I'm I guess maybe 65% love the episode and 35% am frustrated with it. Whereas before we had this situation, I was just oh, this is such a great episode.
Yeah, very
and then the podcast made me dislike it even more, even though we were in the situation with the podcast where we're the parents.
Right.
But we weren't sitting there being well, we need to cure the autism and she's not my kid anymore and everything because we're but she's still our daughter and
Right.
I guess it's just everybody has their own thing, but it's just I had the same issues, I guess.
Go on.
I like that the episode brought attention to autism.
Right.
People in the podcast said that was the first time I've ever heard the word autism on TV. And that's big. Disabilities, there's so much stigma around disabilities, any type of disabilities, of just, you hide that person away, you don't talk about it, pretend everything's normal. So talking about autism on, not live TV, but on, what's the word I'm looking for? Just like the
on TV, on
network TV, where people are watching and learning it. A lot of people might not have really known about autism before at that time. So I do like that it brought awareness and attention to autism. Now that we're in 2018, I struggle with autism awareness. I think that the world is aware of autism. I think we now need autism acceptance, where you accept the person for who they are. You accept that autistic person for being autistic. I stim, I rotate my wrists and I, kind of rock back and forth. I don't do the normal flapping, but that acceptance would be just, okay, Elyse needs something to, to kind of fidget with, as opposed to, that's the social model of that.
Do you let kids use fidget spinners?
Oh, absolutely.
In your class?
Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I let my students, I have a fidget in my purse right under me of just, they can fidget, they can do anything that they need to do, because I understand that way of learning and that way of, having your brain work.
I don't have that issue, but I have ADD, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 27. And on the one hand, I'm sort of glad that it worked out that way, because I was able to duke it out through college by just being rigorous with my brain and whatever. But I took up needlepoint and knitting, and what I found was if I told a professor that I wanted to knit during class because it helps me listen better, they didn't want to hear, they weren't there for that. What I told them every time was that I was trying to quit smoking.
Yeah.
And that having something to do with my hands was helping me with the cravings, which was crap. I had quit 5 years before.
Right.
But, then they had to let me do it, because then they'd be a jerk. So it's interesting that you can't, and now fidget spinners are everywhere.
Right. And then that kind of goes back to the stigma that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
There's so much stigma with being different, with having your brain be different and your body be different. So I guess in that circumstance, it was more appropriate to be a smoker than to have a neuroatypical brain. So one of the things that I did like about The West Wing with disability representation was that they occasionally had actual disabled people on the show. So you can't talk about disabilities in West Wing without talking about Joey Lucas and people being deaf and sign language. Marlee Matlin is amazing and opened up sign language and the deaf culture and deaf world to a lot of those viewers. I think a lot of people hadn't seen sign language on TV before. Just like people not heard the word autism, they didn't see somebody having a conversation in sign language.
Well, listen, I'm one of those people that did, raise your hand if you did, I think I'm the oldest person in the room, god damn it. But when I was a kid, we did like walkathons to raise money for MS research.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big, scary thing that we did walkathons for.
Right.
And when I got diagnosed with it, I was like, I had a Wiggins, and then they tried to explain to me like, no, listen, this ain't your mama's MS. It's not what it was back when you were a kid. But just like how they dealt with it on the show, nobody knows that.
Right.
Nobody knew that. If they had called it, Bob's nerve disorder, then it would have been, oh, okay, I have this thing. But because multiple sclerosis is big and scary, because we're conditioned to see it as big and scary, and I think we probably all know the story of how it was totally an accident that the president wound up with MS. He just wanted an excuse to have President Bartlet pass out in the Oval Office. And somebody went, how about this? And then, but bless him that he took that ball and ran with it. And they used so much, even before I watched the show, I would see websites that were dedicated to the West Wing that would have links to websites that were for MS research. And I was like, yay, TV show that I don't watch.
Yeah.
Thank you for teaching people.
Yeah, they portrayed the leader of the free world with a disability, and kind of showed how that affected him some. Even in the show, they talked about how how much President Bartlet disclosing his multiple sclerosis changed the fictional country's mind about MS. Those polling data of what the governor of Michigan has some disease, would you be more likely or less likely to vote for him? They talked about how in the show how people thought MS was fatal before President Bartlet disclosed it. I took some issue with some of how MS was portrayed in the show. I think for the most part it was very good, very spot on. There were some things that...
The one thing I took issue with, because I'm pretty sure Aaron made it up, because nowhere have I ever found anything documenting it. I've never wanted to have an extramarital affair because I have freaking MS,
Right.
Okay?
Just like being on anti-anxiety medication does not make you racist, having MS does not make you...
I take Ambien fairly often, and it's never made me racist.
Exactly.
Roseanne. Sorry.
He's got to up the dosage a little bit. You haven't reached racist levels yet.
It's so that one, when Oliver Babish said that, I was like, wait, what? And I started Googling, and all I could find it was a thing that was said on the MS, on the West Wing, and I'm like, but why? Why? Don't put that crap in my brain with it, because no. That was annoying, and it bothered me how and this is Aaron's fault, but it upset me how his MS really went from 0 to 60 in that last season. Like, he was fine, and he's on shots, and they never said that it turned into secondary progressive.
Right.
They never said. It was just the attacks all of a sudden went from his hand was shaking and he couldn't hold the pen properly.
Yeah, you and I probably both experienced that.
To I can't move. What?
Yeah.
You know, so that pissed me off, and it was. I mean, it may also just be that it was upsetting to watch. Let me tell you, I can't. The shots, you take them once a week. They make you feel like crap for 24 hours. You feel like you have the flu, and you get bad muscle pain, for which you have to take other things, and it's really annoying. I try to sleep through it, but like, when I'm feeling really horrible, and then you get depressed, because first of all, it's depressing, and second of all, depression is a symptom, and is also a side effect of the shots. So, but you know, I'm watching it one time, and it happens to be 17 people, and I'm an idiot and don't turn it off. And that just, that clobbered me in the face. That clobbered me in the face, and I love Toby Ziegler. I'm sorry, and I'm normally backing his horse, but I'm like, you're hurting me. You're hurting me, Toby. Stop. That said, I don't blame the episode, because everything he said was entirely valid.
Absolutely.
It just hurt.
Kind of what you're saying about watching things and just feeling, having depression or feeling, all these mental health things that often go along with physical disabilities. There's a lot of really good representation of mental health issues in the West Wing. That's something that's also very important to me. My depression and anxiety kind of kicked in when I was a teenager. I lost my mom to suicide a couple years ago, so that's become even more of a forefront in my life. But the fact that they showed therapy on TV, and it wasn't bad. Josh was not talked down to because he needed therapy. The president of the free world saw a therapist.
I want Stanley Keyworth to be my
Oh my
shrink.
goodness, yes.
Aaron writes the best shrinks. On the newsroom, don't you want him to be your shrink?
Yeah. And so, Josh has PTSD, but he's not portrayed as being crazy. And a lot of things, a lot of TV shows or media that show mental illness, the people are like kind of tragic figures of, think of like his Van Gogh of just sad and a good artist and everything in their life is gloom and doom.
Or that you're a delicate flower and you're permanently broken. And, I'm one of the toughest people I know.
Right.
So.
And the West Wing is really good at
Leo
showing.
also having
Absolutely, yeah. So I liked how the West Wing kind of showed those kind of ebbs and flows of mental health issues, where you do have those good times and then you go to the valleys. Yeah.
Right. I think one of the best lines from, and I forget the character's name again, the shrink.
Stanley Keyworth.
Right, was when, like, throughout the entire episode where he's counseling Josh, they really do kind of play Josh's PTSD as this huge thing. It's this big thing. It's this major thing. And then at the very end, when Josh is like, I want you as my therapist, he goes, you're not a tough enough case for me. Like, so they did a good job, I think, of showing that, like, Josh has an issue.
Right.
He definitely has an issue, but it is not as bad as it could be. Like, there are far, that, like, you can have a major psychological issue, and here's this therapist going, you are not.
Right.
You are not at my level. I do not treat people at your level. Here's somebody really good for you.
Yeah.
And it also, he left it on a, because we get better, not just the line, but the fact that, like, the last thing we see in the episode is Josh listening to people singing Carol of the Bells, and he's not twitching.
Right.
And he's hearing it as music, not sirens, which, so it's like, okay, even after the one session, the process begins.
Right.
And then you see in like 2,162 people with the whole idea of bringing out Baker's wife having mental health issues, and bringing Donna saying, don't do this is going to bring back bad vibes from the 19th century.
Yeah.
And then Will is saying, this is the only way that we can stay alive, and that's like the one time I really wanted to punch Will.
I had more than one time, but yeah, that was one of the big ones of just come on, what are you doing?
I don't want to punch Will Bailey until the podcast started pissing me off. It totally just, I had such a crush on Joshua Molina from Sports Night, and the podcast just destroyed that. I'm sorry, go on. It's a whole other panel,
And so
which we had yesterday.
the podcast also shows, other kinds of, I don't know
The
if
Stackhouse filibuster, I did appreciate that they listened, that they let other people call in, that they weren't
Yes.
like just, that they didn't do with what they did with Michelle from
Right.
time to time, and they didn't talk out of their asses about that which they don't know, which they personally don't know.
Yeah, I think it was the next episode of the podcast where they had two people call in to kind of give the other side of it, and kind of what I'm going at now of like living with autism as opposed to the people, putting those autistic voices into the story about autism in the show. I don't know, and I probably should have looked this up to know for certain, but I don't know whether substance abuse falls under mental health, but the show depicts Leo as an alcoholic. It shows those really good times, it shows AA meetings.
Here's my thing with that. I do not and have not had a substance abuse problem. I am, however, anorexic. And I sort of equate eating disorders with things like alcoholism, in which it's a learned behavior. This isn't something you're born with. This is something that you are the first person to pick up that glass of whatever. I am that first person that sticks my finger down my throat and purges my lunch or whatever. And then you get hooked, and then it becomes a learned behavior, and then not only does your brain get hooked on it, but your body does too. And that's when it crosses over. I wish they would come up with a different word, because I had to wrestle for a long time with, when people would say alcoholism is a disease, I just want to go, no dude, cancer is a disease, But at the same time, yeah, it is. Because if anorexia is a disease,
Right.
then so is alcoholism.
Right.
So that's how I got there.
Yeah, so the show showed Leo, at his good times with his alcoholism, going to those meetings, talking about it with the vice president and some of those other, high-profile people in that Sagittarius. No, that wasn't the Sagittarius one. But in the meeting, down.
Stargate.
Yes, that one. And then they show Leo later on in the series when he kind of falls off the train, and the show doesn't shame him for that. That the characters kind of help pick him back up. It's that Leo telling Josh, a guy falls down the hole and people come by, but the one guy comes down in the hole because I know the way out. I've been here before. So I think the show does a really good job of not adding to that stigma of different types of disabilities, of just showing kind of the truthful nature aspect of it.
And it also shows how, like, Leo says to Bartlett, when I pretty much hit rock bottom, you were the one person who stuck by me, which
Right.
I'm someone who deals with substance abuse,
Okay.
or substance addiction. And, like, for me, there was a few close friends that really stuck by me just before I hit rock bottom. And so they're the ones who really stuck by
Yeah.
afterward.
I hate to say, we are at time, and you can run over if you want. I have to bounce because I have another thing that I have to get to on time. I'm gonna leave you with just saying this. I'm seriously thinking about getting a dog.
Perhaps an Irish settler. That was one of our trivia questions.
Yes.
What kind of dog did President Bartlet want that none of us knew?
He doesn't say, does he?
Yeah, he does. He's perhaps an Irish settler. It's when he's on those pain medications for his back.
Right, no,
But
it's
he's-
that, I
he's
don't
quite
remember,
loopy.
I don't remember him mentioning a breed in that episode. I mean, this is.
Well, according to
sweatshirt
trivia this morning,
I
he
don't
wanted an
remember
Irish
an
settler.
Irish setter, but okay.
I think
Senator
people are
Sheldon.
talking over him at the time, so.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
It's a mess.
that makes sense
Yeah,
then.
I think they're all in their little bit of a panic, like if anybody knows this is happening.
So I've kind of blabbed a lot about, my thoughts on the disability representation of the West Wing, how I think it shows the social model really well. It doesn't try to change those characters. It shows the people who have the power to kind of change the world a little bit to make the world more accessible for people with disabilities, rather than putting that onus on the disabled people themselves. But do any of you guys have any questions or thoughts about how the show portrayed, the different types of disabilities we talked about, or any others?
I think, and this is something we were kind of talking about before we came, was I think what you said about not adding to the stigma, like we saw this on the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And at first we were
It was so funny.
She was, we were talking about, and it was like, You know, I don't remember, obviously other than Joey Lucas, you know, she's the most obvious character, I think. It was like, were there really that many disabled portrayals on there? And I remember going, well, the president,
Right.
you know, but I think
And
not.
then I was like, oh.
Oh yeah, and Josh, you know,
And
I
then
think.
we were like, oh.
Yeah, and
And
so
then
I think
Leo.
there's like what you had,
And then,
what they
oh.
didn't do
There
was
were
go.
so many.
What they didn't do was start an episode necessarily and go, and now a disabled person.
Absolutely, yeah. The disabled people had identities outside of their disabilities. And I cannot tell you the number of times in my life where I have been the disabled person and I don't have any other thoughts or identities. And I do. Like, there's way more things about me, way more interesting things about me than my health record. So I like that the show did show people with disabilities living their lives, you know, going to jobs, friends, family, other things than their doctor's appointments or, you know, their pharmacist.
Every time a disabled person came on, it wasn't, you know, next week
Right.
on a very special West
Yes.
Wing.
Yes.
You know?
You know?
I mean, there are even minor characters with disabilities. One of my favorite episodes is Celestial Navigation, where Josh is giving a talk at Georgetown or George Washington, I think, when, you know, Justice Mendoza gets arrested, and the host, I guess, the person that is meeting with Josh on the stage, has some type of physical disability. He has arm crutches. It never says why. That never plays into anything. You know, that's just
I
a
never noticed he had
yeah.
arthritis.
You just see it for a couple seconds.
I honestly feel like,
Yeah, it has nothing to do with his character or the plot. So that had to have been a conscious choice for, I don't know whether that would have been the director or the writer, but, you know, some decision went into, okay, here's a random character that we're not going to see again. Let's, you know, maybe give him these arm crutches to, again, put another person with authority. Like, I don't know who that guy was at his university, but he had to have been a big deal if he was interviewing Josh Lyman.
Right.
Right.
And so, you know, this big deal academic guy has a physical disability and was able to achieve that with his physical disability. So I really appreciated The West Wing showing these characters, you know, with their disabilities, but showing them for who they are and kind of their brains and their talent, not just their body or their brain in some of their cases.
I'll say, for me, I think The West Wing did so many of the good things we're talking about, but I think there's also some stigma that did come up in it in terms of you can't run for office, and it's really related to sort of the Baker's wife and all of that, and Josh mentioning it doesn't really sound like this is something you can have if you work in the West Wing, where it was recognized that people had these disabilities, but not recognized that they could be public, and that it was a scandal if they were public. Like even like in the Joe Quincy episode mentioning, you know, hearing music.
Right.
And Joe Quincy being like, well, I ignore all of those rumors. Like, it's like, I assume it's not true that you have this problem, because that would be problematic. And I think if there was a reboot of The West Wing at some point, one of the best things I read in the past, like, year and a half, 2 years, was the book, Whose Idea Was This? Or something like that. Like, the bookseller has it by Elyse, I want to say, somebody who worked in the Obama administration. And it sort of mentions as part of this, she has these disabilities, which very actively at times, like, she has an anecdote about being about to meet with the Pope in Rome, and her disability is acting up, and it's like this thing. But everyone around her is willing to help her deal with it. And the fact that she could be in this high profile role and do this very hard job, I think meant more to me than any other portrayal I've ever seen anywhere. Not only because it's real, but also because that's not something you'd see in fiction, because people wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But, and like, I know in personal capacity, I also chair the Disability Caucus for the Young Democrats of America.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so for us, there is literally, at any convention, there's hundreds of people there that really got inspired to get involved in public service because of the West Wing.
Right.
But also they just saw, like, these are just regular people who are looking at their lives, like, yeah, they have this as sort of secondary to everything else.
Yeah.
And, turned over to you, I thought it would be.
I think he's telling me that we are at time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining. I hope that you had some things to think about. And West Wing is awesome.
Yes.